Hey, we're working on contending for the faith, and we've got 2 more tips for you today, part 3 of the 3-part series. I'm Jonathan Yellen, and this is Finding the Point. Hey, so glad to have you back with us today. Things are going great here at the Finding the Point studios, and it's great because today we have the most estimable, most incredible Pastor Aaron Mudge. How are you doing, Pastor Aaron?
I'm doing pretty good, Jonathan. You know, you keep introducing me that way, I'm going to get a big head.
Yeah, but it'll be okay because you earned it. Okay, I'm being silly. No, honestly, Aaron. For those of you out there, Aaron's actually a pretty modest guy, and I really appreciate that characteristic of him. It's one that you would do well to emulate, and so would I. Pastor Aaron, today we're talking about contending for the faith. We've been talking about it for the last, 2 episodes now. This is part 3. We're back to ways that we can contend for the faith. We're looking at how we should contend for the faith from Jude 1:3. We talked about the last 2 sets, and today we've got some new ones. I'm pretty excited to get into it.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. It's good to be able to talk about these things and, you know, different ways in which that we can share our faith with other people. I think people freeze up sometimes and think of it as, well, I have to memorize all of these verses and things, and I think we overthink sharing the gospel, and it's really just showing people that God's way works, right, and they need God, and so anyway, these are some ways that we can do that.
Yeah, and you mentioned memorized. It's a thing that, I mean, even I was taught like a memorized program to learn for sharing the gospel, but I don't know necessarily that that's going to be what's most effective most of the time, because when you're dealing with real people, there's not like one script that fits all the solutions. You've got to take each person as an individual.
If you look at the life of Christ and the apostles, who, as they talked to people and shared the gospel with others, Jesus and them, they didn't come in a one scripted way. Jesus approached different people. Some people he approached them because, well, they already would have had a knowledge of God and the Old Testament, and so he approached them one way, and then others he approached in a different way. And the apostles, Paul, did the same thing.
Yeah, that's really important to note too. And even I know we're just leaking bits and details of the online outreach program, but even in our main tract section of the online outreach program that we're developing, we tried to create the text that shows, or that would be able to be received by somebody with very little knowledge of God, but still be understandable. Because we know it's not like the 40s and 50s anymore, where everybody knew who God was and kind of had the basic idea. I mean, we've got literally people who've heard almost nothing about God, and anything they have heard has probably been wrong.
Yeah, I've had kids come into my church that, it's Christmas and we're talking about Jesus and the birth of Christ, and they have literally never heard the story of the birth of Christ. They don't even know who Jesus is.
That's sad. But that's the world we're in. I mean, I think that even the supposed academics that are supposed to be very intelligent and knowledgeable don't really have a ton of information and a ton of knowledge about what the Bible actually says. I mean, they'll mock it and they'll try to refute it without even knowing really what's in it. So, yeah. It's kind of a sad thing. I don't know. I'm kind of tempted. I probably shouldn't because we're not ready. I'm kind of tempted to show our tract information. Should we? Maybe I shouldn't. We should. I'm really excited about this.
Let's just wait until it's ready, and then people can see it.
Wait. You know what? If you really want to see it, folks, leave it in the comments. Let us know if you want to see our tract info before we release it. Because I'm really excited. I think it's going to be pretty awesome. I put a lot of research and time and effort into making it short and succinct, but effective and biblical, and I'm Can you tell I'm excited? I
It's
really
good
think
to
this is
be
going to be
excited.
awesome. I think this is going to be an awesome program, and I think it's going to be really helpful for regular people, regular Christians, to go out and present God in a way that even somebody who is steeped in the world could at least
Yeah,
understand what you're saying. Like they
yeah.
might not just automatically, suddenly get saved because they saw the track, but they at least could understand with the incredibly limited amount of information we have about God what
I
is
like that
going
you
on.
said regular people, because we tend to put some of the people, like say in the Bible, Paul and Peter and James and John, on this pedestal, like they were these like elite Christians that God used. But
Hmm.
the fact of the matter is, they were just regular people. In fact, some
Yeah.
of them were even uneducated. They were fishermen. It wasn't that these guys were the elite most spiritual. It was that they were willing to do what God was asking them to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it helps us understand more what our faith should look like and be like when we think of them as just being the regular people who were willing to go out and do what would need to be done. I mean, it's like this show. I mean, we've talked in our meetings before. I don't really feel like I'm necessarily a talented show host or someone who has any real business doing this program. Like, I'm not like a radio person. I didn't go to school for this sort of thing. But I feel like, this is what I have been led to do. And, I learned to do all this stuff through all these different trials that God put me through. And we happen to have the equipment, and the drive and need and the knowledge just needs to get out somehow. And this is the only way I know how to do it. I would like someone more talented than me to take over the show, but I mean, it's what God's given me. So I don't know. The little rabbit trail there.
Yeah,
Hope we're okay.
that's all right. But when we're weak, then we're strong. We learn to trust God, and it's not in our talent and ability. And so, as
Right.
we use some of these strategies to contend for the faith, we need to remember that it's not about me. It's about God. And if I'm willing to do what God has asked, and I'm submitting to Him and obeying, then He's the one that's going to be doing the work.
Yeah, and if you feel like I do that you're not adequate, you're not good enough to do what you're called to do, maybe you're right, but it also doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We just go out and do what God's asked you to do. It's God who's going to give the increase.
That's right.
It's not on your talent. Okay, so speaking of things that we are going to try to use here to contend for the faith and help others learn to accept God and God's way, let's get to our points. Let's see. Here we go. So this, if you're counting with us, we had the first 2 episodes. If you haven't seen those, we have 2 per episode. So this gets us up to number 5. Go back and watch those. You don't have to watch them in order, but they are helpful, in my opinion, for finding cool ways to contend for, or effective ways to contend for the faith. Okay, so number 5 is we should share our faith as a story before the person you're sharing it with faces the trial. Okay, so Pastor Aaron, I'll send it over to you. You got a good bit here from Luke for that, so go ahead.
So this is something that we see Jesus doing all the time. Everybody knows, if you study the life of Christ at all, you realize that he teaches a lot in parables. And a parable is a story that has a particular lesson or point to it. And most of the parables that Christ gave do exactly this: sharing a story that show a way to act or something that you should be doing before you face the trial. And one example that we have is found in Luke chapter 10, verses 30 through 37. And it's known as the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in this parable, before he gave the story, he was talking to a man about the fact that we're to love God and love our neighbor. And the man said, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus gave the story of the fact that our neighbor, the ones that we're supposed to be loving, are those people that we come across. And so there's this Samaritan man that was beaten almost to death. And the Jews hated the Samaritans. And there were several of the elite a priest and different elitists in the Jews that passed by this Jewish man that had been beaten up. I think I said a Samaritan man, but it was a Jewish man that
Right.
got beaten up. And this Samaritan man, who the Jews hated, comes by, and he takes the man up. He cares to his wounds, brings him to an inn, pays for him to be taken care of, and literally saves his life. And Jesus says, that's what it means to be a neighbor.
Right. Yeah. And so he presents that story to these guys to give the answer for neighbor. And the idea is that going forward, when they are in a position where they see someone who has a need, they should act with the love for their neighbor as herself.
That's
so,
right.
So, from the more research perspective side of things, or like modern behavior science research, we talked about this before, so I'm not going to dive deep into it. We know that if you present a model using words, using a story, and then you explain the correct outcome that will result from that, and then that story occurs and they do follow that model and the correct outcome does come from it, they're much more likely to accept the set of behavior that came from. So the idea being here that if you were to act as a good neighbor, and as in in the Christ model from the story of the Good Samaritan and the parable there, you would see that someone who does hear that story ahead of time from you then follows through with the way there, recognizes that, oh wow, God's way works. Okay, so that's sort of like the big picture breakdown of how it all is going to go. But realistically, at least the way I would put it, and Aaron, maybe you want to weigh in on it, but from a practical perspective, this really just means that you would be sharing your experiences and testimony of how you live and act in God's way in the world with people.
Yeah.
It's really similar to the one from last episode, Let Your Light So Shine. But in this one, it's more of, I think it's got more of a teaching element to it.
Yeah, well, and God's word does tell us the fact that sometimes that we go through trials and difficulty in our life so that we can teach other people and to give them comfort. And so someone that's been through a horrible loss, say the loss of a child, is better able to share experiences and stories with someone that has dealt with that. Or say maybe someone that's gone, has had children before. Often it's good to be able to share to someone that's expecting, to say, hey, you know what, this is something that you're probably going to experience, and this is how we dealt with it. And then that way they're prepared before it happens.
Yeah, and also, I'm going to rabbit trail for like 5 seconds. If you see a family that's going to have their first kid, don't tell them it's going to be terrible. Please. when we were having our first daughter, I can't even remember how many men in the church came up to me like, oh, it looks like your life's going to be over now. You're going to have your daughter born, and then your life's going to be over. And I was like, what are you talking about, man? It's like, I think what realistically they were saying is like, you can't just like get up and go out to a restaurant whenever you want to. You gotta like find a babysitter and stuff. So like, okay, yeah, but maybe it's just because I'm boring and I don't ever do anything fun. So it's not a big deal to just not be able to get up and run. But that was a bad rabbit trail. I'm sorry, Aaron. Maybe we should jump to the next point. But yeah, the idea is that we're actually teaching, and I think this one is a really good one to apply to kids. The idea that we're going to teach the story before we face the trial. Let me see the time here. I think I've got time to share this one last story. Recently, my daughter, currently in kindergarten at our local Christian school, she had an assignment and she did not do her best on it. And her teacher caught her basically just putting in some bad answers so that she could be done and go play. And so that wasn't great. And I found out that the assignment, which shouldn't have been too hard for her, might have been too hard for her because of some other things that I'm gonna work with her on. but she didn't have a good response ahead of time, and so we talked through a story of what it would be like to do it right. And I use this technique with her, and essentially is trying, hey, if it is too hard, you can pray and ask God, and then you keep trying until you get it done. And so by presenting that story to her ahead of time, then the next time she goes into class, she was able to do that. And I also secretly coordinated with her teacher so she would get extra stickers when she did that too. So um, trying to plan things out. And I do love that our local Christian school is so good, and the teachers are helpful and able to work with parents in a great way. And if you're lucky enough to have a Christian school for your kids where they'll do that, that's awesome. But that's the idea. It works great with kids. It can work in any situation where you have a teaching opportunity with anyone. This is a great method to use. All right, Pastor Aaron, let's go on to the final one, number 6 here. I think we've got time to go through that pretty well. Go ahead.
All right, so this one is to make a connection and earn trust with someone. In other words, become friends. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be best friends with someone, but make a connection. Find something, maybe you have in common with them, or, it could be, I don't know, many different ways, but just make a connection. People are going to be more apt to listen to what you have to say if you have a connection with them, rather than just coming up to cold to someone and say, right, "Do you know Jesus?" They're going to listen to you more if they have a connection with you.
Yeah, and the example I can bring in from the therapy side of things too. The first thing we have any therapist do with a new client, they spend the first 2 weeks just playing together, and that no matter what level, even if they're high functioning teenagers or kids with a lot of challenges that are younger, we spend the first week or so, sometimes even 2 weeks, just playing together, so that the kid forms a connection with the therapist. And we call it pairing, so that the kid pairs the technician or the therapist together with reinforcement and positive experiences, and they learn to essentially trust that person. And if you, as a Christian, working with worldly people or interacting with them, however you're going to do it, you should be the kind of person that someone would trust, and someone who is positive and fun and encouraging. Just like we would make those connections with the kids in therapy, you can make connections with people in the world. And when you are the kind of person that they would know and trust, when the chips are down and they really need help, and you come to them with Bible solutions and Bible answers, you're a person that they will look to and accept those answers from. Sorry about bumping the mic, Aaron. I hope that didn't hurt you.
I do the same thing. One particular example is our church helps out and takes kids to a Bible camp for 2 weeks. We have 1 week is junior kids, and the next week is senior kids, senior campers. And one of the things I always try to teach new counselors is that you can't just go into the cabin with a bunch of kids that don't know you and just start saying, okay, you need to do this, and telling them what to do and how, they're not going to want to listen to you, especially when you get to teenagers. And so you have to make a connection with them first. For one of the ways in which I've done that, of course, with guys, for me, I find that to be easier. I had a cabin, these guys, they're young, athletic guys, and I'm not an athlete. And so there, I didn't really find a whole lot of interests that we had in common, but they were doing push-up and pull-up contests and arm wrestling. And so I just came over to the guy that was beating all the others in arm wrestling, and I said, all right, let's go ahead and let's arm wrestle. I did. I beat him. And then all of a sudden, instantly, I've made a connection with all the guys. And now we're able to make some headway. And so when I say, all right, guys, it's time to settle down and get ready for bed, they're more apt to listen to me because they've made a connection with me. And it's the same as we seek to, defend the faith and contend for the faith and present the gospel to someone, is if they understand that, hey, this person cares about me, they've, sought to make a connection with me, when they give the gospel, then maybe it's something I should actually listen to.
You're bringing back all my camp memories. My wife and I met at Camp Kobiak, and yeah, we did that same thing there. Uh, just making the connection first helps. I've seen it. I worked there 2 different summers when I was in college, and it's true. And Camp Kobiak's still going strong. Aaron Wilson, if you're watching, we appreciate your ministry. Keep it up. But yeah, that's a great example. And also too, Aaron, we have lest we forget the Bible example, which we're definitely not going to forget, but we got to go quick because we're almost out of time. Zacchaeus, I think, is a great example where Jesus used this technique. I mean, technique makes it sound so clinical. It's not a technique. It's just a way to contend for the faith. But he used this way of contending with Zacchaeus. 30 seconds or less, Pastor Aaron. Go ahead.
So in Luke chapter 19, we have Zacchaeus. He hears about this famous Jesus that's coming through, and he wants to see him. And of course, Zacchaeus is short. He climbs up this tree so that he can see Jesus. And Jesus walks by and stops, points at Zacchaeus and says, Zacchaeus, you come down. I'm going to come to your house, and I'm going to have a meal with you. And so Zacchaeus, he's a tax collector, and everybody hated the tax collectors. So Jesus goes into his house. In fact, most people would not even go into a tax collector's house because they were deemed to be wicked. And Jesus went into his house, had a meal with him, and therefore making the connection. And Zacchaeus ended up getting saved and changing his ways.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And man, there's so much more application I'd like to make on that, but we are actually out of time. So, Pastor Aaron, thank you very much. We have a challenge for this one. So, I guess I'll give Pastor Aaron's final challenge since he just got to talk for the last 30 seconds. The challenge is this. Please find a way to use either these 2 from this episode or the 4 from the previous episodes. These ways to contend for the faith and apply them in your life. And then I would additionally challenge you to tell us about a positive experience that you had contending for the faith in our comments below this video. Thanks for joining us today. I do want to recognize and shout out our producer, David Gentle, who you probably wouldn't see this without him. So thank you, David. He also has repeatedly told me we need to have everyone share these videos so that the word can get out and spread, and more Christians and more people can see what we're pushing for here on Finding the Point. I think that's all. Pastor Aaron, it's time to go. So bye, everybody. We'll see you later.
Bye. Thanks for joining us.